The man stopped directly in front of Marcus, looking him up and down with cold, calculating eyes. "You're in the wrong place, boy," he said, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone used to being obeyed without question. Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't understand what you mean. This is a respectable event. People like you don't belong here." The man's words hung in the air like poison. "I suggest you find somewhere else to stand guard, maybe around back with the service entrance." Other visitors had begun to gather near the entrance, their conversations dying as they sensed the tension. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond. His training had prepared him for many situations, but this particular kind of confrontation always cut deeper than any physical threat. "Sir, I'm assigned to this post by the Royal Security Service," Marcus replied calmly. "I have my orders, and I intend to follow them." The grey-haired man stepped closer, lowering his voice but making sure it was still audible to the growing crowd. "Do you know who I am? I'm Colonel Richard Hartwell, retired. I served this country for 30 years, and I won't be lectured by someone like you about duty and orders." Marcus recognized the name immediately. Colonel Hartwell had been a decorated officer, though his career had ended under circumstances that were never fully explained to the public. Now he worked as a consultant and appeared frequently on television, discussing military matters. "Colonel, I respect your service," Marcus said, his voice steady, "but I'm not moving from my assigned position." Hartwell's face reddened. "This is exactly what's wrong with this country. Standards have dropped so low that they'll put anyone in a uniform now. In my day, the Royal Guard meant something. It represented excellence, tradition, honor." The crowd had grown larger now, with several people holding up their phones to record the encounter. Marcus was acutely aware that whatever happened next would likely end up on social media within minutes. But something else was happening too. Marcus noticed a familiar face in the crowd, someone he hadn't expected to see here today, someone whose presence changed everything about this situation. The familiar face belonged to General Patricia Hayes, one of the most respected military leaders in the country. She stood near the museum's main entrance, partially hidden behind a group of other officials, but Marcus could see her watching the confrontation with intense interest. Colonel Hartwell seemed oblivious to her presence as he continued his verbal assault. "You people think you can just waltz into positions that real soldiers earned through blood and sacrifice. The Royal Guard used to be an elite unit, now look what it's become." Marcus maintained his composure, though he could feel his heart racing. He had dealt with prejudice before, but never so publicly, never with so many witnesses recording every word. "Colonel, the Royal Guard maintains the same standards. It always has. Every member earns their place through rigorous training and evaluation." "Training?" Hartwell scoffed. "What kind of training? Diversity seminars? I commanded real soldiers in real combat situations. I know what it takes to serve this country properly." That's when General Hayes stepped forward from the crowd. Her movement was subtle at first, just a slight shift in position, but Marcus caught it immediately. So did a few others in the crowd who recognized her distinctive silver hair and commanding presence. "Colonel Hartwell," she called out, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Hartwell spun around, his face immediately changing as he recognized her. "General Hayes, I didn't realize you were here. It's an honor to see you again." "Is it?" General Hayes walked closer, her expression unreadable. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're harassing one of my finest officers." The crowd went completely silent. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade, as everyone strained to hear what would happen next. Marcus felt a surge of surprise. General Hayes had called him one of her finest officers. He had served under her command 2 years ago during a special security detail, but he never imagined she remembered him so specifically. Hartwell's confidence wavered for just a moment before he recovered. "General, surely you understand my concern. The Royal Guard represents our nation's highest military traditions. We need to maintain certain standards." "Standards?" General Hayes repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me, Colonel, what standards are you referring to exactly?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Hartwell seemed to realize he was walking into dangerous territory, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I think you know what I mean, General. Tedal values. The way things used to be done." Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. He had always respected General Hayes, but seeing her defend him so directly was both gratifying and nerve-wracking. He wondered what else she might say. "The way things used to be done," General Hayes repeated slowly. "You mean like when certain people were excluded from service based on the color of their skin rather than their abilities?" The crowd began to murmur, sensing that this confrontation was about to take a dramatic turn. Several more phones appeared, recording every word. But what happened next shocked everyone, including Marcus himself. General Hayes pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be official documents. "Colonel Hartwell, since you're so concerned with standards and traditions, perhaps we should discuss your own service record." Hartwell's face went pale. "I don't think that's appropriate in this setting, General." "Oh, but I think it's very appropriate," General Hayes replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been afraid to speak truth to power. "Especially since you've chosen to make this a public discussion about who deserves to wear the uniform." Marcus stood perfectly still, maintaining his professional posture, while this extraordinary scene unfolded before him. The crowd had grown even larger, with museum staff and other officials gathering to witness what was becoming a very public confrontation. "You see," General Hayes continued, "I've been reviewing some old files recently. Fascinating reading, really. Did you know that in your final year of service, you were investigated for multiple incidents of vicious against minority soldiers under your command?" Hartwell stepped backward. "Those charges were never proven. I retired with full honors." "You retired to avoid a court-martial," General Hayes corrected him coldly. "The investigation found a pattern of behavior that violated military regulations and basic human decency. 3 soldiers filed formal complaints. 2 others provided corroborating testimony." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Someone whispered, "Is she really doing this?" Another voice said, "This is incredible." Marcus felt a mix of vindication and discomfort. While he appreciated General Hayes defending him, he hadn't expected the confrontation to become so intense or so public. But General Hayes wasn't finished. One of those soldiers, by the way, was a young man named David Chen. "Ring any bells, Colonel?" Hartwell's hands began to shake slightly. That was a complicated situation. Complicated how? Because Sergeant Chen was Chinese American. Because he dared to file a complaint when you told him he didn't belong in your army. The silence was deafening. Marcus could see several people in the crowd exchanging shocked glances. This was clearly bigger than anyone had expected. Sergeant Chen went on to serve with distinction in 3 combat deployments. General Hayes continued relentlessly. He earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. He currently serves as a training instructor for new recruits. "Would you like to tell this crowd that he doesn't belong in the military either?" Hartwell opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed truly speechless. That's when Marcus realized something that made his blood run cold. He recognized the name David Chen, and if he was right about who that was, then this situation was about to become even more complicated than anyone could have imagined. Marcus's mind raced as he connected the pieces. Sergeant David Chen wasn't just any soldier. He was Marcus's mentor during his early days in the military. Chen had been the one to encourage Marcus to apply for the Royal Guard selection process. He had been the one to help Marcus prepare for the rigorous physical and mental evaluations. And Chen had never told Marcus about his experience with Colonel Hartwell. General Hayes seemed to notice Marcus's recognition. She glanced at him briefly, and he saw something in her eyes that confirmed his suspicion. This wasn't a coincidence. She knew about the connection between Marcus and Chen. "There's something else interesting about Sergeant Chen's story," General Hayes continued, her voice carrying across the now silent crowd. "He's currently responsible for training some of our most elite security personnel, including entrants of the Royal Guard." Hartwell finally found his voice. This is ancient history. I don't see what relevance it has to the current situation." "The relevance," General Hayes said, stepping closer to him, "is that you're standing here questioning the qualifications of a Royal Guard member who was trained by one of the soldiers you tried to destroy 20 years ago. Officer Williams here represents everything that's right with our military: dedication, professionalism, and the ability to rise above prejudice and hatred." Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. Several people in the crowd were nodding in approval, while others looked uncomfortable with the intensity of the confrontation. But then something unexpected happened. A new voice spoke up from the crowd. "Excuse me, but I think there's something else you should all know." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was an elderly black woman, probably in her 70s, wearing a simple but elegant dress. She walked forward slowly, using a cane for support. "My name is Dorothy Williams," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her age. "And Officer Williams here is my grandson." Marcus's eyes widened in shock. His grandmother lived 3 hours away and rarely traveled anymore due to her arthritis. He had no idea she was planning to attend the museum exhibition. "Grandma," he said, breaking his professional silence for the first time, "what are you doing here?" Dorothy Williams smiled at him warmly before turning her attention to Colonel Hartwell. "I came to see the military history exhibit. My late husband served in Korea, and my son, this young man's father, served 2 tours in Afghanistan before he was killed by an IED. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "But I also came because I heard about what's been happening lately. People questioning whether certain folks belong in uniform. People trying to turn back the clock on progress." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "And I wanted to see for myself what kind of man would have the nerve to tell my grandson he doesn't belong in the Royal Guard." Hartwell looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. But Dorothy Williams wasn't finished, and what she said next would change everything. Dorothy Williams stepped closer to Colonel Hartwell, her cane tapping against the marble steps. Despite her age and apparent frailty, there was something formidable about her presence that made everyone, including Hartwell, pay attention. "You know, Colonel," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had lived through decades of struggle and change, "I've been watching this whole conversation, and I keep thinking about something my husband used to say." She paused, looking directly at Hartwell. "He used to say that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they treat people they think can't fight back." The crowd was mesmerized. Marcus had never seen his grandmother speak so publicly or so forcefully, though he remembered her as someone who never backed down from what she believed was right. "My husband fought in Korea alongside white soldiers, black soldiers, Hispanic soldiers, Asian soldiers," Dorothy continued. "They bled together, died together, saved each other's lives. And when they came home, some of them faced people like you, people who wanted to tell them they didn't belong, that their service didn't count, that their sacrifice wasn't good enough." Hartwell shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I respect your family's service, but nothing," Dorothy interrupted, her voice sharp as a whip. "You don't get to disrespect my grandson and then hide behind false politeness when his grandmother shows up." General Hayes was watching this exchange with obvious admiration. Several people in the crowd were nodding in agreement, and Marcus could see that public opinion had shifted dramatically against Hartwell. But then Dorothy Williams did something that surprised everyone. "However," she said, her tone softening slightly, "I didn't come here to humiliate you, Colonel. I came here to ask you a question." She walked closer to him, close enough that their conversation became more intimate despite the audience of dozens of people. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "What happened that made you so angry, so bitter, that you have to take it out on young people who are just trying to serve their country?" For the first time since the confrontation began, Hartwell's composure cracked completely. His shoulders sagged, and Marcus could see something that looked almost like pain in his eyes. "You don't understand," Hartwell said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I gave everything to the military. 30 years of my life. I missed my children growing up. My wife left me. I sacrificed everything for an institution that threw me away the moment it became convenient." The crowd was silent, many people leaning forward to hear his words. "And now I see people like him," Hartwell gestured toward Marcus, "getting opportunities that I had to fight for every single day, getting respect that I never received. And it makes me angry." Dorothy Williams nodded slowly. "I understand anger, Colonel. I understand feeling like the world has changed and left you behind. But taking that anger out on my grandson won't bring back what you lost." That's when Marcus realized something that would change his entire perspective on the situation. Something that made him see Colonel Hartwell not as a villain but as something much more complicated. Marcus watched as his grandmother continued her conversation with Colonel Hartwell, and suddenly he understood something that no one else seemed to have grasped yet. The colonel's anger wasn't just about race, it was about feeling obsolete, forgotten, replaced by a world that had moved on without him. "Colonel," Marcus said, speaking directly for the first time since his grandmother had arrived, "may I ask you something?" Hartwell looked at him with surprise, as if he had forgotten that Marcus was still there. "When you said the Royal Guard used to mean something different, what specifically did you mean?" General Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly curious about where Marcus was going with this question. The crowd remained silent, sensing that something important was happening. Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, then said, "It used to be about brotherhood, about a shared sacrifice that bound us together. When I served, we knew we could count on each other absolutely, no matter what." "And you don't think that exists anymore?" Marcus asked. "How can it?" Hartwell replied, his voice full of frustration. "Everything's different now. Different people, different standards, different values. The military I knew is gone." Marcus nodded slowly. "I think I understand what you're saying, but can I tell you about my experience?" Hartwell looked skeptical but didn't object. 2 years ago, I was assigned to a security detail in Afghanistan," Marcus began. "We were protecting a convoy of medical supplies going to a remote village. Our unit was attacked by insurgents, and we were pinned down for 6 hours." The crowd was completely silent now. Everyone focused on Marcus's words. "The soldier next to me was a white guy from Alabama named Jake Morrison. He had grown up in a town where people like me weren't welcome. But when I took shrapnel in my leg and couldn't move, he carried me 200 yards under enemy fire to get me to safety." Marcus looked directly at Hartwell. "Later, when we were waiting for medical evacuation, Jake told me something. He said that before he joined the military, he probably would have crossed the street to avoid walking past me. But that day, he said he would have died before leaving me behind." Hartwell's expression had changed completely. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, recognition perhaps, or memory. "That's the brotherhood you're talking about, isn't it?" Marcus continued. "The kind that transcends everything else when it really matters." For the first time, Hartwell nodded slightly. "It still exists, Colonel. It's just bigger now. It includes more people. But the essence, that willingness to sacrifice for each other, that's exactly the same." Dorothy Williams was smiling now, pride evident in her eyes as she watched her grandson speak. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. Colonel Hartwell stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, his eyes fixed on the ground. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "I owe you an apology," he said to Marcus, his voice thick with emotion. "What I said was wrong, completely wrong." The crowd began to murmur again, but Hartwell held up his hand. "No, let me finish. I've been carrying anger for so long that I forgot what I was really angry about. I thought the military had abandoned me, but the truth is, I abandoned the values it tried to teach me." He looked around at the crowd, then back at Marcus. "You represent everything good about military service, dignity, professionalism, dedication. And I tried to tear you down because I was too bitter to see it." General Hayes stepped forward. "Colonel, it takes courage to admit when we're wrong. Real courage." Hartwell nodded gratefully, then turned back to Marcus. "Officer Williams, would you be willing to shake hands with a foolish old man who forgot what honor really means?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and extended his hand. "It would be my honor, Colonel." As they shook hands, the crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Someone shouted, "Now that's what I'm talking about." Others began cheering and taking pictures of the handshake. But Dorothy Williams wasn't finished yet. "Colonel," she said, walking up to both men, "I want to invite you to something. Next month is Veterans Day, and our community center is having a dinner to honor local veterans. Would we like to come as our guest?" Hartwell looked stunned. You would want me there? After what I said?" "Especially after what you said," Dorothy replied firmly. "Because redemption only means something when it's earned through action, not just words." Marcus smiled at his grandmother, amazed once again by her wisdom and grace. "I would be honored to attend," Hartwell said quietly. General Hayes stepped forward again. "Colonel, if you're serious about making amends, I might have a suggestion. We're always looking for experienced officers to help with our mentorship program for new recruits. It pairs senior veterans with young soldiers to help them navigate military culture. You would trust me with that? Hartwell asked. Everyone deserves a second chance, General Hayes replied. The question is what you'll do with yours. As the crowd began to disperse, many people stopped to shake hands with both Marcus and Hartwell. Several veterans in the crowd approached to share their own stories of overcoming prejudice and building bridges across racial and generational divides. Marcus resumed his position at the museum entrance, but everything felt different now. The morning had started with a confrontation that could have escalated into something ugly and divisive. Instead, it had become something else entirely, a reminder that people could change, that understanding was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. His grandmother approached him one final time before leaving. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Not just for how you handled that situation, but for who you've become." "Thank you, Grandma. But how did you know to be here today?" She smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say that General Hayes and I have been corresponding for a while. She wanted to make sure someone was here to witness your character if it was ever questioned." As Dorothy Williams walked away, Marcus realized that his calm response to Colonel Hartwell's aggression had indeed crushed him, not through anger or confrontation, but through dignity, understanding, and the power of communities standing together. The Royal Guard uniform he wore represented more than just tradition. It represented the possibility of a better future, built on the foundation of service, sacrifice, and the courage to see beyond old prejudices to the person underneath. And that, Marcus thought as he watched the last of the crowd disappear into the museum, was a victory worth celebrating.